We told you at the top of the program, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton accepted responsibility for the terror attack in Libya last September, but still defended herself and the administration's actions. Let's talk about what we heard today with House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Good to be with you.
First of all, your thoughts on your committee hearing today, what you heard, what you didn't hear.
Well, I think we had a lot more questions than we got answers. And one of the things I think we really found today was that this attack was unprecedented, as they argue. It wasn't that it wasn't unforeseen. 3 months prior to this attack, there was communication on up the line in terms of the danger of an attack there. There had been 2 attacks on the facility. We had a situation where there was a desperate request for aid, and it was not forthcoming. So, since you're dealing here with an Al-Qaeda franchise that's the fastest growing in the world, and we've just had an attack in Algeria, how do you change the culture of the State Department when the 4 people that are culpable, according to the State Department, are still on the payroll? We learned that today. They're still on the payroll.
You know, Mr. Chairman, the thing I heard most today on email, on Twitter, was really frustration. They thought there was a lot of speech-making and not a lot of pointed questions, that they didn't think the questioning was that great.
A lot of pointed questions, not a lot of answers.
Really? You thought so?
And one of the things we're following up with are written questions. And the reason we do that is in order to be able to follow up on some of what we heard.
You probably
because
don't
they can run out the clock, and you saw some of that.
Well, you're going to run out the clock at Secretary Clinton's term.
Exactly, and that's why we're moving quickly in terms of those additional questions that we are submitting.
So if you don't get those answers that you're looking for, would you subpoena her to come back?
Well, we would. We would if we didn't get the answers. But the answers, frankly, she was under oath today. When you appear before our committee, you are. And the follow-up questions will further proceed down that line of inquiry that you heard today. And there were a lot of questions today, as you probably would acknowledge if you think about the specific ones asked by House Republicans. There was a lot of defense on the part of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
You hear what Democrats say. You hear that they say this is all political, that this is all about politics. What is the response to that?
Well, I think the response is obvious. You had a massive failure here. This is the first time in 35 years that we've lost an ambassador. And in response, for the questions that we're asking, we're either going to change the culture in the Department of State or we're going to continue to have problems. I say that because if you have personnel on the ground that have an inability to reach the upper echelons of the State Department when they're explaining that they're watching Al-Qaeda, that the Al-Qaeda threat in their presence is growing, that Al-Qaeda is out on the street marching, that Al-Qaeda is carrying out attacks, 2 attacks on that very facility, and you still can't manage to reach the upper echelons at the Department of State in order to get the assets deployed, when you turn down Department of Defense assets that are in theater because the State Department has this culture where they say, well, it would be embarrassing. And that's the words of State Department employees. They're embarrassing to accept the help of Department of Defense in defending that personnel. This makes no rhyme nor reason, but this is in fact what happened. And so, yes, we have to force a change in that culture, and that's going to require quite a bit of work.
Mr. Chairman, what was surprising to a lot of people is that the term video really only came up one time in questioning that we saw in the 5 hours of testimony, and here was the answer to that question about whether this anti-Islam video played a role, and something she said before.
I did not say that it was that it was about the video for Libya. It certainly was for many of the other places where we were watching these disturbances. We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with. It is hard for the American people to make sense of that because it is senseless. And it is totally unacceptable. The people of Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Tunisia did not trade the tyranny of a dictator for the tyranny of a mob.
Your thoughts, I mean, just seeing those two clips, that last clip is obviously at Andrews when the bodies were coming home.
Yeah, I think obviously that contradicts the reality of what we know, what we all know about this operation, which was that it was al-Qaeda. And it took this administration, 14 days during a campaign to admit that that was the case. And we still have a hard time extracting that admission, don't we? But the reality is, in hindsight, that everyone can see the evidence now of an al-Qaeda operation that frankly has now expanded all the way into, well, 2/3 of Mali is now under the control of the AQIM, with the very weaponry they took out of Libya, with the very shoulder-fired missiles that they took out of that inventory in Libya. And now they're in Algeria, just made an attack on a gas facility. So yes, we are trying to push the information out to the American public as to who really it was behind this attack, and I think we've succeeded in debunking the thesis that this had something to do with the video.
All right, I want to play one more clip for context here and then get your reaction from today and looking back.
You briefed the president. Did you tell him that, or did you tell him, which Admiral Mullen suggests you knew by then, that this was a well-planned and executed terrorist attack? Which was the president told?
Well, first of all, I said the very next morning that it was an attack by heavily armed militants. The president said that morning it was an act of terror.
No acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation, alter that character, or eclipse the light of the values that we stand for.
Mr. President, this morning you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack.
Right.
Do you believe that this was a terrorist attack?
Well, it's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved, but obviously it was an attack on Americans. And we are going to be working with the Libyan government to make sure that we bring these folks to justice one way or the other.
Quickly, a lot has been made about this, and Democrats say it's all about semantics. What do you say?
Well, I say that the administration did not want to be charged with losing 4 brave Americans at the hands of an al-Qaeda attack. And I think they bent over backwards for 2 weeks during the campaign in order to try to deny it. And I think that part of that denial was this very video that they put up front and center as the excuse rather than an admission that al-Qaeda was operating in that area, that al-Qaeda was carrying out attacks, that al-Qaeda had attacked our allies, such as the British ambassador, attempted to kill him, and was trying to kill our own personnel. And so that was, in fact, I think, maybe subliminally, the motivation. But certainly, when it goes for 2 weeks in the face of all the evidence reported internationally in the press, it eventually was a position they couldn't sustain. But you still see them trying to rationalize this.
All right, Mr. Chairman, and just to be clear, if you don't get the answers, you're going to subpoena Secretary Clinton
That is
again.
correct. That is correct. We want the answers.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Brett.
The Fox All-Stars weigh in on Secretary Clinton's appearance today. When we return, Krauthammer, Williams, and Hayes after the break.